Greetings everyone and welcome to Modern Gnosticism. My name is Brian Stanford and today I'm going to do something that I haven't done before. I posted a video yesterday rambling on Gnosticism Part 5 and had a really good question from one of the channel's viewers, and I decided I'd like to make a short video responding to this question because I think it hits onto something that is important, at least for me, in the way that I interpret what I'm calling modern Gnosticism. So we'll read the question, and the question comes from Jeremy Davis, and the question was posted in the Inner Sanctum, which is the members forum for Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. And if you've never listened to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, I really suggest you check it out. If you make a small donation to Miguel, he'll add you to the secret Facebook group where a lot of really good conversation occurs about Gnosticism from a full range of people, from scholars who've written multiple books to people who are independent scholars who've never written anything, to practitioners, to people who are just curious. But a lot of good content there, and I'll put a link to Aeon Byte in the show notes at the bottom. But the question says, so question for you, Brian. Do you think the dualistic nature of reality is an intention or a non-intention? For instance, do you think the Demiurge was intentionally created for this, quote, game realm, unquote, so we would have something to struggle against, and we've all agreed to come here and play this dualistic game? Or do you think that it was an aberration, some kind of an AI that took control of the game, or was created unintentionally, and we are trapped here against our will? Or something in between? And thank you, Jeremy, for that question. And it gives, as I was sitting thinking about crafting a response to it, I recognize that it really hits on something that I've been thinking a lot about in regards to Gnostic mythology. I think modern Western people like ourselves, and particularly you see this a lot in regards, you see it in regards to everything, but you see it in regards to biblical scholarship. And I know it took me years and years and years to learn to not read religious texts as if they were history books. I think that we often look at things like the Bible and think that it is describing things that occur in physical reality, in the way that things occur, like I just ate lunch, or I'm feeling kind of under the weather, or I drove my car to the store and bought some food, or that the Civil War occurred between a certain set period of dates. I don't think that religious literature is usually describing these kinds of events. Now, in the Gnostic mythologies, Jeremy mentions the Demiurge, and we've probably talked a little bit on this channel before about the Demiurge, but to give a quick rundown of what's being discussed there, in the Gnostic mythologies, it is taught that there is a God above the God of this world. So, sometimes this is seen in an interpretation of certain passages from the Old Testament, or even entire books of the Old Testament, being the word not of the ultimate highest God, but of a lesser form of divinity. One of the main ways I see this expressed in the Old Testament is when you have God talking about wrath and jealousy and anger and base human emotions, things that you wouldn't want to experience in a neighbor or a friend, things that you yourself, if you're a person on the spiritual path, are attempting to overcome. And so it's really confusing to see things like that attributed to what is claiming to be the supreme deity. And in some of the Gnostic mythologies in Genesis, where God says that there is no other God above him, a voice comes from above him pointing out his ignorance, actually there is a God above the God of this world. And in a lot of the Gnostic texts, the word that's used for the God of this world is the Demiurge. And this is a word from ancient Greek, and it's used, I think it comes from some of Plato's dialogues, and it means like a crafter or creator. And so in some Gnostic mythology, the ultimate God who is beyond all of our conceptions, all of our ideas, all of our distinctions between existence and non-existent. So like the ultimate God, you can't say God exists. God doesn't exist. God is beyond existence and non-existence. It's ineffable. You can't describe it. All words fail. All concepts fail. And this is the highest God. And this God creates through emanations that basically involve it limiting itself in order for creation to occur. And so in some of the Gnostic mythology, when they talk about the Demiurge is the creator of this world. Not the creator of existence, but the creator of the material world that we live in. And in some Gnostic myths, the Demiurge is seen as benevolent, but just kind of experiencing some aspects of ignorance. And in some Gnostic myths, the Demiurge is actually seen as a malevolent character. And in these forms of the myth, the Demiurge has created the material world as a prison for the sparks of the divine that make up humanity. And so in the question from Jeremy, when he asks me, do I think the Demiurge was intentionally created for this, quote, game realm, so we would have something to struggle against, and we've all agreed to come here and play this dualistic game? Or do you think that it was an aberration, some kind of an AI that took control of the game or was created unintentionally and we are trapped here against our will, or something in between? And my answer would be, it's kind of something in between. I think what the Gnostic myths around the Demiurge and what Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer, described as the black iron prison of material existence, these are maps to try to get a handle on vast amounts of territory that ultimately we have to explore ourselves. And so in one of the maps, the Demiurge has intentionally created a prison planet, a prison world, where the sparks of the divine are trapped, and that part of liberation is to free ourselves from this. And in some maps of the mythology, as Jeremy describes it, the Demiurge could almost be like this AI, this artificial or created intelligence that has just kind of set this thing up and it's running. And in some maps of the Gnostic mythology, the Demiurge could be kind of like deists conceived of God, that he created he created everything and then just stepped back and is letting it run. He's like kind of like an absentee landlord. And what I have found is just as if you're going to go hiking somewhere way off in the wilderness, it's a good idea to have multiple maps of the area. In the same way, I think this is how we should look at these myths. They're not describing a either-or scenario, like the Demiurge functions this way, or the Demiurge functions that way. One of my first spiritual teachers, Robert Anton Wilson, used to famously say, quoting from General Semantics, that the map is not the territory. And also that the universe is not this binary choice of yes or no, black or white, either or, but it contains a both and a maybe. And in my practice as a Gnostic, what I have found is that I use these different maps in different situations. So there are definitely times when the suffering aspects of existence are very apparent to me, right? My nose is pressed right up against them. And in those situations, it's actually very comforting to kind of view the world through the mythos that's kind of expressed in movies like The Matrix, right? That actually this existence is as flawed as it is because it is a prison. And the idea is not to make myself comfortable in the prison, but the idea is to escape from the cosmic prison and to return to my true home. And when existence is really bearing down on me, this kind of interpretation of the myth is very helpful, and I'll direct my reading and my practices and my meditation to this idea of breaking free from the black iron prison. At other times, when my nose isn't pressed right up against the suffering of the world, and I'm recognizing the aspects of existence that are beautiful and sexy and fun and exciting, I pull out a different map to interpret the territory that I'm moving through. And with this map, maybe the Demiurge is a completely benevolent creator who has created this space for the sparks of the divine to come and experience embodied reality as a human. And that the Demiurge sends messengers and messages about our true nature to help us fully experience the enjoyment of this existence while still keeping a focus on what our true reality is. And sometimes it seems very evident that the creator of this world is an absentee landlord. So I don't look at religious myths as explaining a materialistically scientific explanation for how reality is. I look at them as contextual to situation in which I need and use them. And quite honestly, this is one of the things that I think is really enticing about studying very early Christianity, what some people call primitive Christianity. So Christianity before it was codified into hard orthodoxies. And if you look at the early history of Christianity, what you will see is not one universal agreement, even on a single mythic structure. You'll see in these early forms of Christianity the influence of different philosophies and different myths and different ways of interpreting them. And I think that this early primitive Christianity is something that will resonate with modern esoteric seekers. We're not looking for a hard orthodoxy that's giving us an exact explanation of how things should be done, or of how things actually are, or of how a myth has to be interpreted. Much more what is important, particularly as Gnostics, is to engage in our spiritual practices. And as I mentioned in the video yesterday, engaging in relationship with elevated spiritual beings who are interested in our liberation. Engaging in these things along with learning and study, and then find your meaning for the myth. So here in Asheville, we have our local Gnostic church, St. Moses the Black. And at church the other night, we were doing a Red Book study, and we had a meditation before. And in between those two, one of our members asked me about the Three Marys. And she was explaining the way that she viewed and interpreted the idea and kind of mythos of the Three Marys. And then she asked me, is that right? And I told her, yeah, I'd never thought about it like this, but it sounds great, and I'm going to incorporate it into the way I view it. And she kind of sat back and laughed, and she was like, wow, Gnosticism is kind of like a creative writing class. in regards to the Bible. And I laughed and said, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mentioned Aeon Byte, Gnostic Radio, in the beginning of this video. And if you listen to it, which you really should, one of the things that the host Miguel Connor says is that we're writing our own gospels and living our own myths. And I would say that this is one of the prime directives for the modern Gnostic, is to engage with the mythology as a living thing and to find your correct interpretations of these myths, and realizing that they're open-ended things, that hopefully there'll be times throughout your life where you'll have a completely new view and understanding of it. So again, I would like to thank Jeremy Davis for his question, and I hope that this video helped elucidate that for him and for anybody else who watches it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And as always, I leave you with the blessing. May the Holy Spirit lead you from darkness into light, from ignorance into gnosis, and from death into immortality. Until next time.